Hello everyone, am I audible? Can you maybe put it in the chat if I'm audible? Okay, that's great. Good evening everyone and welcome to our first Android Jam session. As today's speaker, we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Pankaj. Hi Pankaj, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Kanishka, I can hear you.
Okay, welcome and thank you so much. I'd like to give a quick introduction. He's the Google developer expert for Firebase and also a contributor for the open source software and creates tutorial videos on his YouTube channel, All Techies. He has over 6.5 years of experience in Android app development, and he's also an active speaker for Android and Firebase topics. Apart from Android app development, Pankaj also has experience in creating multi platform apps, adding augmented reality experience to mobile apps, training and integrating machine learning models to Android apps. I'll also be sharing the YouTube link to his channel and the Facebook group that is created. So if anyone is interested, you can join in. And welcome, Pankaj. Thank you so much for coming for us and speaking in this session.
Thank you for inviting me for today's session. I believe it's going to be an exciting one for all those who want to learn about Kotlin. So let me start with a bit of introduction about me. Kanishka has already said a lot of information about me. Uh, Basically, I work as Android developer in Verizon, India. I have over 6.5 years experience in making Android apps, and I also work on augmented reality. And in today's session, I'm going to talk about how you can get started with Kotlin. Well, many of you might be interested in your career as an Android developer, but the language is something which is very important. If you know about the language, then it's going to be very easy for you to succeed in Android app development career, because eventually that's something which is very helpful. So let me get started by sharing my screen. Do my screen is visible? Or Akansha, if you could share my screen. Okay, great. So before I get started with Kotlin, how many of you have experience with Kotlin, or you might have used before in any of the project, or say for the learning purpose itself? No one has used it. Okay, fine. So let me start with the Kotlin syntax first. Now, the basic of all language is the syntax. In college, you might have studied about C, C++, or Java, and initially you get started with the Hello World program. The overall idea of doing all those things is just to let you understand about what you see as an output when you code something. Kotlin is an object oriented language, which is something you could say as an alternative to Java. So, if you know about Java, then most of the functionality which Kotlin is going to offer, you might already be aware of it. But if you have no experience in Java, then also it's okay, because Kotlin uh, have much more features than what's available in Java. So let me start with the basics first. For any programming language, as I said, you need to know about the data types, variables, functions, classes. So we are going to see all those things today. Okay, now let me say about the integer. So int, string, float, double, this is something which you might be aware of. They are the data types. So one of the common convention in most of the languages that you see data type first, and then after that you see the variable name. And then whatever value you want to set, you can set there. You may have a data type of integer, string, double, boolean, whatever it is. And that's one of the common notion which you see across many other programming language. But in Kotlin, it's a bit different. Let's see what's special we have it in Kotlin. Instead of having data type first, it's other way around. You have a variable name first, and then colon. After that, you say about the data type. It's very straightforward. You have a variable name, then colon, then data type. In Java, it's other way around. You first say about the data type, then variable name, and then if you want to initialize some value, you could do that. Here also, if I want to initialize with some value, I could say equal to, say 100. One weird thing which you might be seeing here is val. I'll come to it later on. But so far, the one thing which you could understand is that through this, I'm declaring a variable and I'm saying that it's of int type, and then I'm also giving a value to it, the default value. And one notion here is again about the semicolon. Generally, with C++, Java, you'll see that your line end with semicolon. But here in Kotlin, you don't need to bother about it. So no semicolon here. But this is not the only way. Kotlin is very developer friendly language. So say for example, you have a variable again, it's of int type, and you have also given a value to it. Then how about if it could automatically understand that because you're giving the integer value, so this variable has to be of int type without you explicitly defining as an int type. It's one of the paradigm of functional programming, and that you can do in Kotlin too. So either of these two is exactly same. Here, you are explicitly saying that variable name is of type int, and here, variable to name, uh, it's getting the value as 100. It understands it's of int type, so automatically it make this as integer. So this is how you create a variable in Kotlin. And now let me come on the val and var. So say you have a variable as name, and you have this as xyz. Now, if you want to show it on a console, then you could say this as print name. Now, if I run this program, you'll see this as XYZ. This is very straightforward. Earlier, I've shown about integer. Here, I'm just setting this as an string value. Again, I'm taking the advantage of value because instead of saying data type from my side, I want this to derive the data type from the value. But now, what is this val? Because it makes sense that you have a variable name, then you could say colon, and after colon, you say about the data type, and then the value. Till here, it does make sense. It's quite similar to the Java or C++. But what's this val? So in Kotlin, we have something called as val and var. If you want to make this mutable, then you have to make it as var. And if it is immutable, then val. What do I mean by this one is, if I want to change the value of name, because variable has a property where variable can be initialized multiple times. So now if I want to change the value of this with ABC, it's not permitted. Why is that? Because here I said val. That means only and only assign this value once. And once again, at the time of declaration, I did it. So I have exhausted that. Now I cannot change the value of this object anymore. But this may not be the scenario which we need all the time. Because for variable, we want the value to keep on changing. So during that case, we can make this as var. Now if I run this program, instead of XYZ, you'll see this as ABC. Because initially it was XYZ, I've set it to ABC, and then I'm saying print name, which will be ABC. So that was about the val, var, and data type. So do anyone is having question regarding this val and var? Okay, I could see that there is a question on difference between print and println. Well, the difference between print and println is that with print, say for example, I do it once again. Now you'll not see this coming in next line. And with println, it is like print with new line. So automatically it will add a new line. So here you could see ABC and ABC. It's in a single line. But if I say this as both as println and then println, they'll come in new line. And you could see that. Okay. Another question I could see is that without specifying data type, do we use a decimal to differentiate integer and float in Kotlin? Yes, that's there. So say for example, I say this as val, say some number, and I say this as 10. Now this 10 is integer. If I say this as 10L, then it's long. I say this as 10.0, it becomes float. So it all depends on the value that you are giving. Based on that, it automatically takes the data type with respect to that. So any other question on this? So do anyone have any question on val and var? Because that's one of the very important one which you'll see across many of the Android application. If you want to create Android application, then object is something which you'll come across a lot. And var, val, late init, lazy property, these are a few things which you'll see very often. How do you copy and paste a line on a next line with a single step? Well, it's an IntelliJ idea. And for that, I just need to press Control D and it gets the duplicates. Okay, now let me switch to nullable property. So how many of you have an experience in Java? For val, no changes, and for var, it will allow changes. So if you want a object where you'll not change the value, you have to use val, and for those where you want to change, you have to use var. And one interesting fact about This one is, but before that, how many you have experience in Java or C or C++? Okay, so I just want to know about one thing, that what is primitive type and what is object? Or do there is any difference between both of them, or there is no difference between object and primitive type? So in C, C++, Java, at all those places you will see primitive type. C, obviously you will not have the class concept, but C++ and Java, they'll have it. So how do object is different from primitive type? No answers? Well, object is something, if you see in Java, then you have something called as int, and then you also have something called as integer in Java, where you say int is for primitive type and integer is for object in Java. So with Java, you have both the concept. You get integer, you also get object too. But in Kotlin, there is nothing called as primitive type. Everything is object. With object, what do I mean by that is whether you say int, you say string, you say about float or double, all these things is object in Kotlin. But object allocation versus primitive allocation, that's where the major difference comes in. Primitive being very fast, object tends to take a bit of time because it need to allocate memory from the dynamic allocation. So isn't it, it's an overhead, and it's a drawback in Kotlin that you don't have any primitive type, because primitive type takes from the static memory and it's very fast. Okay, not the static memory, but there's another block for this. From there it takes the memory, which is very fast as compared to object. But as I said, at Kotlin do not have primitive type. So isn't it, it's something which is quite bad from the language side. So how can JetBrain, which is the company behind Kotlin, which is having a huge amount of experience in creating the smart editors, we leave this point. So Kotlin is very, very well advanced enough to know about whether the object should be an object or primitive type, and compiler decide this. So being the programmer, if I want to have a number, I'll say this as int. Now, for me, this is an object because there's nothing called as a primitive type in Kotlin. But when I run this application, compiler will automatically make this as primitive type. This is done automatically for you. You need not to take care of this. And one major difference between primitive and object is that primitive will not allow the null values, whereas object will allow null value. So here, if I try to assign null value, then it will not allow me, because it truly doesn't make any sense that I'm saying about the integer and then I'm saying null value to that. But during network calls or during certain scenario, there is a possibility for this. So to do this, we have something called as question mark operator. When you say this, then it will make this as an object. So num will be an object. Even compiler will not change it to primitive type. But if you do not make this as nullable type, if you just say this as int with some value, then this will remain as primitive type, and that is taken care by the compiler. Okay, now because most of you have experience with C++ and Java, so you might be well aware with null pointer exception. So say about this that I have name and I set this. Now I'm saying this as print name dot length. What should happen in this scenario? Will it execute properly or will throw some exception? Or when do we get null pointer exception? Okay, I could see the answers as 0. Okay, any other answer for this? No other answers? Well, if I run this one, then eventually, because editor is smart enough, it will stop me here itself. But if somehow I run this one, then this should throw a null pointer exception. Why is that? Because I'm trying to say get the length of an object from a null object, and any operation performed on null will result in null pointer exception. So when you have to create an Android application, you need to take care of this a lot, because a single null pointer exception can make your app to crash, and suddenly your app will go out of the screen. So handling null pointer exception is extremely important as you build Android applications. So to handle this, we have something called as question mark operator. Now if I run this, it will return the value as null itself. It means that if the object is not null, then get the length of it. And if it is null, then return null. And as you could see. But instead of null, if I say something other than this, then I'll get the proper length. So here I have the value. So that's a major difference between nullable and non-nullable objects. On nullable objects, if you want to access any of the property on it, you have to access using the question mark dot. And is this clear to everyone? That why should you use question mark dot and when to use question mark? Okay, so do I'm clear so far? Because now we are about to move to a very important section, which is function. Nothing as of now. Okay. I could see, is it like if else operator? Yes. So say for example, this what internally does is, let me show you the code for this. Show Kotlin bytecode, decompile, and this is what it does. The original code was this. We had name of type string, and then on that we were accessing length. In reality, what it does is that it creates a name object with a null value by default, and then it set the value as null, and then eventually it just print that value. So it's a sort of if else. You could say that if it is null, then return null, else proceed next, and whatever we are doing we could do it. And it's a series of chain. For example, if I want to add some value to this, like I want to add 10 from my side. If I made this question mark dot initially, then for all other next operation also, it does require me to do those things. Otherwise, you'll see this red error. That's because if this is seen for the first time, then for the next subsequent all calls, I need to add this operator too. Okay, and one more thing before I switch to function is else if. So one thing which you might have seen is, say for example, you might have such things in Java where you could say if and else. If this is null, then say return 0, otherwise do something called as name.length. This is something which you might see very common across C++ and Java too, where you first check for the nullability and then eventually you say if it is null, then do something, otherwise do something else. And now in Kotlin, if you just want to check about null, then we have an operator dedicated for that. So you could say this. What it means is that if the left hand side value is null, then automatically come and check for this value. I'd say dot length. So let me delete this. Earlier, when I've shown this and it was null, so the value which it has printed was null. But null is not something which is an integer value. I want a proper value for this. So now I could say that instead of name question mark dot length, I'll say name question mark dot length, then question mark colon, some default value. It means if this returns null, and which eventually return null because name is null, then ignore all of them and return this default value. Now I'll see the value as 0, even though name is null. And here it is. Okay, now let me move to function. So function is one of the very important concept because if when you'll see about the Android application, which eventually you're going to see soon, then you'll see that most of the modules that we create submodules, and function plays a very important role there. So how we can create function in Kotlin? Well, the function main itself, this itself is a function. But let me talk about the syntax first. So function is defined with the keyword fun. This says that you are going to create a function. Then you give a function name here. It could be anything. Based on your wish, you could give the name for this. Then brackets and eventually braces. That's it. So if you want to call this function, just call the name of it and that's it. But function in Kotlin is not just an ordinary function which can just work like this way. How about the parameters? Say I have num1 of type int. With this, I'm saying that this function is going to accept parameter where I'm saying the name of the object will be num1 and its data type is int. This is exactly same as what you've seen before, and I was writing something like val. But now with the function, you do not need to have val or var because by default, all of them are val and it will remain val. So you cannot make this as var. So there's no point of writing val or var at this place. It's not needed. It's not even accepted. As by default, it is val and will remain val. Similar way, if I need to have more than one object, I could again have multiple objects too. And then I can access those values here. Say I just want to add num1 and num2. Then while calling this function, I can pass on the values to it. This is something which is very common, which you'll see in C++ and C++ and Java too. You create function, you give the parameters, and while calling this function, you pass on the parameters values too. There is nothing advanced so far. But now let me tell about the advanced thing which we have it here. Say for example, num1 is 10 and num2 is 50, which is quite confusing. So let me change the function. Let me say about user details. And I want to have a value about name of the user, age of the user, and the address. And then eventually here, I just want to print name, then age, and address. So what you're seeing here, this is called a string template, where you can give the value of an object. So you can print the value of this object just by using this dollar symbol. Dollar name will print the value of name, whatever we are going to pass with this function definition. And let me call this function instead of this function name. So name, let me say this, age, let me say 111, address, let me say this as null. Well, if you see this, then it's red color line here. Now, anyone can tell me that how can I resolve this? I want to give address as null because I don't have value for address. So I want to pass null here, but it is not allowing me. You could see it's red in color. So how can I fix this issue? Any suggestion for this? What changes should I do on my user details function so that it could accept address as null? Yes, that's correct. I have to use question mark for this address object. The moment I say this, I make this object as nullable, and then it will allow me to have a null value. But now I have another scenario. Now instead of address as null and then name, age, and address, which is defined here, I have to give the name first, then age, and then finally address. I don't want to do in this way. Rather, I want to pass address first, name next, and then age. Well, this is not something which is permitted in Java, but how about Kotlin? You could see all red line, and the hint that you're seeing is it's asking for name, age, and then address. I did all the mess here. I have changed all those things. Instead of name, I'm saying null. Instead of age, I'm giving name. Instead of address, I'm giving age. Now how can I pass value like this? Well, the best thing with Kotlin is that it is permitted in Kotlin. You have to use the named argument here. So this was the correct scenario, correct sequence 2, where you pass name, age, and address. And you could see with the function definition here, it's a name, age, and address. But now in my second scenario, I want to pass address first, then name first, and then age. So in order to do that, I need not have to do any changes to this function. Rather, I have to use a concept called as named argument. That means before passing the value, I just need to give the name of the argument, which means this one. So here I want to pass address. So let me copy for the address. Let me say address equals to. Same way, here I'll say name equals to. And here I could say age equals to. This is something called as named argument. So with named argument, you need not to follow the sequence anymore. You can give on the values based on your wish. That's one of the very cool feature of Kotlin. But we are not done yet on this. How about I do not want to pass the age too? I don't have a value for age. I don't want to pass the value. Well, with the function definition, I said that I need three values. All the time, I need three values. I need name, I need age, I need address. But here I'm saying that I don't have age, so I don't want to pass age when I call this function. So if we provide the default value by saying equals to and then the value, right, while creating this parameter, then this is called as the default argument, which means that if I do not pass values while calling this function, it will automatically take this as the default value for this object. So do everything is clear on this? We have named argument and default argument, and you have seen both of them. This one is taking advantage of default, and this one is taking advantage of name, where we are passing address first, then name, and then eventually address, age. The correct sequence is name, age, address. With named argument, we are changing this sequence. With default arguments, we are not passing all the values. Rather, we are skipping few of them. And those values which we are skipping, it will automatically fetch the default value from the value which you have provided with this function. So is this clear, the default arguments and named argument? If it is clear, then let me move to classes then. Or do anyone is having question on function? Because function is extremely an important concept of Kotlin. And if you want to have it for the Android app development, then that's something which you'll see very, very often with extension function, higher order function, that you will see later on. But so far, it's just a normal function where the objective is just to show that how do we create function, we call function, and we have a named argument and default arguments supported in the function itself. So any questions so far for this? Okay. So I could see a few questions. If we want to skip for one, then what? So if you want to skip for one, and here you could see that the age property has been missed out. And if you're saying about completely missing out those things, then that's not permitted because function is asking for three parameters. And now we are passing two parameters. So eventually the third one, which we have missed out, it should have the default value for that. Okay, what is the use of braces, the bracket? Where do we are using bracket? So this bracket, so that's a normal way of defining a function. So inside this braces, so this is the name of the function, just a declaration so far. And inside this, you have the function definition, which says that what this function is going to do. If one exception is there, so, what sort of exception? Okay, nothing as such. Then let me move to class then. Okay, so now let me say about the class. How do you create class in Kotlin? Well, for creating class, we have a keyword called as class and then name of class. Then eventually, whatever properties which you want to have it inside this user class, you can have it here. If you want the values to keep on changing, you could say this as var. So the same thing what we have seen with a function, now I'm writing those things inside a class. But one thing if you see, then for all of them, I'm giving the default values too. And why is that? Well, it's because for the higher level declaration, you'll see this error all the time. And it gives that error that this has to be initialized right at the beginning. So all the higher order declarations or the high level declarations, the global level declaration, you could say, they should have the default value. And later on, based on your requirement, you can keep on changing these values too. So it's one of the simplest way to create a class. Then if we want to create an object of this class, we could say val user equals to user, and that's it. In Java, you could see something like new user. We do not have any new keyword here. Rather, you just say the class name and that's it. It will automatically create the object for you. And then if you want to change the value of these properties, you could say object name dot whatever property you want to call upon. It's very straightforward. No magical signs, very straightforward. We have class keyword, we create class with that. Then we have name, age, and address property. Eventually, you on the object which you have created on this class object, that object dot property names. You could call any of those property and change the value. And Kotlin is smart enough to know about whether you are trying to set the value or read the value. Like for example, here I'm saying user.name equals to xyz. Now if I say this as println user.name, now Kotlin is smart enough to know that here you're trying to call the setter on this, and here you're trying to call the getter on this object. As soon as it sees equal to, it automatically set the value. And if you do not see the equal to operator where you're just trying to access the object, then it calls the getter on that. Okay, so far everything is clear, or any question on this? Okay, I think everything is clear on this. So let me talk about the model class then. So this is so far a very normal class, and inside this class you could again have the function based on your need. You could create any sort of function, and if you want to call this function too, it's a very straightforward thing. Just the way you're calling this object, you can say user dot dummy. You can call this functions too. This is a pure class. But if you want to create a model class where you just need to have the getters and setters for this properties, then instead of creating class like this, Kotlin offers a data class for that. So instead of this class user, say I'm creating a model class for students. And now inside this, I may say val name, val age, and val address. So what's the major difference between both of them? Well, as I said, this is a pure class, and inside this class, you could have your objects. All these objects should have the default values too. And now, for this one, you do not need to provide any default value. For this, if it's just a one-time declaration and just one-time call, then you could make it this as either val or var based on your wish. If you are making this as val, then whatever value which you have set here, that will remain as it is. So it doesn't serve much purpose. But here, you could either make this as var or val. And then based on your requirement, you just keep on changing the values. So let's see this one. So here you have seen about the user. Now let me do the same thing for student. Well, students. And now I need to provide the value for all of them. Here we are not having any constructor, and in this data class we have kept everything inside constructor. So it is important for me to provide value for each of them because we haven't provided any default value to any one of them. But as I said, val property is we cannot change the value of the object. So now on students, if I try to call age and I try to set the value, it will not allow me. The thing which was permitted here with the user is no longer permitted here. Why is that? Because we made this as val. That means at the time when I was creating this object, whatever value which I have given as a constructor parameter, accept those as the final value and then don't change the values again. But if this is not the scenario, I want my values to keep on changing based on my wish. Instead of val, I should make this as var then. Now it is completely permitted. So the value which I have provided during this function, during this object initialization, now I'm changing the property value. So the 0 will override with 22. Another major difference between class and data is that it will also automatically creates the two object and equal operator. So equals and two string object. It automatically creates for you. Whereas for class, you need to do everything on your own. Okay, so that was about the introductory concept of Kotlin. Now, do anyone is having any question on these things, on variables, syntax, function, or class? Or do everything is good? Okay, no doubts, no questions. Then let me talk about the extension functions. And that's a very exciting topic. So think of a case like you have an integer. You're saying this as value 10. Now if I print this number, it will print the value 10. And there are certain set of operations that we can do on this number. All these operations is related with int. For example, plus, and, compare to, decrease, divide, minus, or range. All these things are available on int type of object. But how about if you are saying this as a money value and you want to say this as $10? Well, if I run this, I again see the value as 10, but I want to append a value dollar to it. So I'll get money as integer, and then before printing this value, I want to append dollars in front of this. So what should I do in this scenario? For that, simple case is create a function. Function, I'll say add dollar, and then also return this as a string value. Then we'll say some value. Let me say this as value here, which will be of type int. So we could say as value, add dollars in front of this. That's it. So now if I run this, I'll see as $10. And this is normal function. No extension function so far. So here you could see you have $10. But we have a better way to do this. This is more towards the Java way of calling a function with a single parameters, and on that you are trying to operate something. But what Kotlin offers is that you can have this as an extension function. And I'm saying this that I want to have this an extension function on integer. So I'll say int dot now name of the function. I need not to pass this value anymore. And I could reference whatever value which I got as int from the money object as this here. This means whatever value on which we are calling add dollars. And that's it. So instead of calling like add dollars money, now what I could say is that money dot add dollar. This will automatically append dollar in front of the value. So this property is called as extension function. Extension function is a property where you can add functionality to the existing component without inheriting it. So that means now this int is no longer a normal int. This int is no longer a normal int where I can just do plus, minus, divide. Rather, I can add dollars to this integer value. And not just this, I can even call it directly too. I could say 10 dot add dollars. Like this. So it's not like you have to assign it to an object and then only call this function. It's an extension on int. So any integer value dot add dollar. And this add dollar is the functionality which you have written. Now this is accessible for all the integer type. That's an extension function. And any question on this? Because extension is one such thing which will enhance the way you write your program. And one cool thing which you'll get in this one is, say for example, you need to add tips too. That whenever you're adding dollar, add something like $5 or $10 tips too. So let me say as tips. And if user do not give any tip, you add $5 from your side. And then I could say that plus tips. What it means is that whatever value which you are passing, which is 10 here, while adding this dollar, also add tips value, which if it is not provided, then it's 5 by default. So if I run this now, instead of $10, you'll see this as $15. And here it is. Or if I have to provide tips from my side, I don't want to give $5, I want to give just $2, then I could say something like this too. Money dot add dollar and tip value as 2. So now I'll see this as 12. Okay, so let me take this outside. Let me say this as well result equals to this, so that it will be much more clear then. This is how I'm calling the extension function, an extension function built for integer. But one of the cool thing with Kotlin is that if you have one at left side, one at right side, that means on an extension function, if you are just having a single parameter, then you can also add infix to this. And the moment you add infix to this function, then it will allow you to call without having these parameters too. Okay, and let me remove the default value. So this is one other way to call this. And because we have added infix, now what is again permitted is remove this dot, remove this parenthesis, and that's it. This is exactly same as this. But now we do not have dot operator or the function parameters. So no more this brackets, no more this dot. This is replaced with spaces. Okay, and now the final and the last topic is the higher order function. Okay, so far we have seen that we were calling a function and that function was having some sort of parameters. Now higher order function is a function where you can return function as a result or pass function as a result. So it's a second order function. So it's not an ordinary function. It's a function which takes function as a result or return function too. For example, your function called as operation, and then you're providing some sort of number, say num1 and num2. And then inside this, you're saying about num1 plus num2. Return this. So I may call this as well result equals to operation 10 comma 5. So what's the value which I'm going to get if I call print result? What's the value which I'm going to get? Is it going to print some value? It's an error, any exception, what it is? No answers. We have an operation function. Inside this operation function, we are accepting these two parameters. We are saying add both of them and then return the value back to the caller. Now say what is the value of result. Well, that's going to have the value as 15 because we said num1 plus num2, which is 10 plus 5. So it will return value as 15. And one thing is that when we have a single line return statement, then there is a shorthand notation too. Instead of having this braces and then just writing the single line, we can avoid those things with equal to sign. And when we do that, we need not have to write this return keyword too. This is exactly same as what we have seen before. But here, no more braces, no more return keyword. Rather, it directly return the value back to the caller. Okay, let me revert this back to the older one. So this is what we have seen earlier. And this operation function is just to add two numbers. How about if I want to do for multiplications too, then division, then subtraction? So for all of them, I need to create a function which is going to return uh, how about now? How did it got muted? Okay, I'm back. Okay, so till what point uh, things were audible? When I was talking about higher order function, so can you tell me the last point till which I was audible so that I could repeat myself then? Okay, so let me explain this once again. Okay, so say we have an operation function, and this operation function is just doing an addition for now. But how about if I need to do multiplication, division, subtraction? Well, for all of them, I need to create separate functions. But we can avoid creating multiple functions with higher order function. So instead of just having this plus, we can ask the caller itself to give what sort of operation is required for these two objects. Higher order function is extremely helpful when you want to do certain activities within a function. So say for example, instead of having this as a normal function, let's create this as a higher order function. So let me give the label first, which is, you can think as if the name of the function, but it's a label, and then the two parameters. The return type of this function is integer. So this is a higher order function. And you can correlate this with a normal function. So for example, you have a function op, and inside this you had function num1, num2 with a return type of integer. Now this is something which is quite known to you. Sorry. This is something which is quite known to you. You create function with a fun keyword, give the name of it, you have the operators, and then define the return type of it with colon data type. Now same thing can be correlated with a higher order function too. Now the name of the function becomes a label. So this fun keyword will go away and this will be replaced with colon. Now this will act as a label. Also, this parameter's name is no longer required. Only data type is important. So let's remove both of them too. And then eventually the return type of function, instead of colon, here we say with an arrow operator. It doesn't have any definition, so let's remove these braces too. That's the exact same thing which you are seeing here. We have the label as op. It accepts two parameter, which is of integer type, and this function return integer. Now let's call this higher order function. This accepts two parameters, two integer parameters even. So we can pass this num1 and num2. That's it. Now this function will return an integer. That's what we are returning as a return type for this function operation. Now if I need to perform the addition operation, I just need to pass it as a lambda. And inside this, I could say this as num1, num2, whatever name you want to give, you can give it here. And then what operation you want to perform. So this is for sum. Then this is for multiply. And let's do another one for subtraction. So let's multiply this, subtract this. Let's do this for multiply and this for subtraction. Now my function remains same. which is operation. I'm passing the objects. This could be anything. It's not fixed, it's not consistent. You can give anything to this. It's completely dynamic. And what sort of operation you are interested in, you are passing that in the lambda. That you want to add these two numbers, here multiply these two numbers, and here subtract these two numbers. Now let's run and check this out. So for sum, we could see the value as 15. And then for the next one, we could see the value as 250. And for the third one, we see value as 30. It's just a single function, but this single function is doing multiple operation. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, whatever you want, you can have it right as a lambda. This lambda is something which is called as a function. It's an anonymous function which you are passing as a parameter, because this is a function and all these three things is a parameter. That's what a function is. A function is a higher order function if it accept function as a parameter or return function as a result. And here we are passing function as a parameter. How to take input from user? So this is the place where you take input. Now this operation is something which you'll define. For example, that when user clicks on a button where you want to add two numbers. Now this is something which is consistent, but these two numbers, this is something which will be dynamic. So for these things, you could say where num1, and you could have initial values. Then for number 2, you could have some other values. Then eventually, based on some user action, just keep on changing these values. And as you change these values, call this function again. That's it. By this way, you make it dynamic. This is defined from the developer, and the value is dynamic based on user action. So if you're creating, say you're creating a calculator. Now, when user clicks on a plus, if you have the, then you know that you want to call this operation function. So as soon as you get the value 1 and 2, clicks on equals, you just need to call this function with a plus operator with that. So this is how you create higher order function. Now this may look a bit complex, so let me simplify this. Let me say instead of operation, now I say about perform some action. And here I'm saying that I need name of the user, and then I'll say some block of code. Now this is also a higher order function. Earlier you have seen it was a higher order function with two parameters and a return type of int. Now this higher order function is, it can accept anything. It need not have to have any parameters. It doesn't accept parameter 2, and it doesn't return anything too. So I could say this as block. And while calling this function, whatever action which I want to perform, I could write it here itself. Say I have x, y, z. And then what do I need to do? All the operations which I want to do on this string or any other thing, or for example, say if you want to perform something, provided when this name have a length greater than 10, then only you want to run this particular piece of code. Then you just pass on the name, and if this value is greater than 10, then only it will execute this block, otherwise it will ignore it. Let's check that out. Let me have a print. It's inside lambda. Now you'll not see this as of now because we are passing xyz. We put a condition that if length is greater than 10, then only execute this piece of block, otherwise ignore it. So far you'll not see this piece of code, this piece of block. Now let's increase the length of it. Because this is greater than the length which we have specified, which is 10, it will execute this particular piece of code too. And now you'll see this text, it's inside lambda. So higher order function is helpful in many ways. It just depends on your use case and how you create these higher order functions. Okay, now any questions on this? Because we are done with today's introduction to Kotlin.
That was a great session. Thank you very much for coming and teaching such wonderful things. It was really insightful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was quite nice for me also to come here and interact with all of you here.
Now, I guess we can wait for 2, 3 more minutes for the questions if someone has any sort of questions.
Sure. And meanwhile, if you want, then you can share the links which I've shared to you. So anyone who is interested in Android app development, you could subscribe to the channel and join the Facebook group too, which I've created, which is dedicated to the Android developers.
Definitely sharing it in the comment section.
So thank you so much, whoever has found the session helpful. And in case you are interested in Android app development, want to know from other developers too, then you can join that Facebook group. That's for the place where you can interact with other Android developers. You could ask questions to them, or you can know about what's going on in the industry, uh, because there are posts which is relevant to Android and the topics which is quite running in the market. The second link is about the All Techies. So All Techies is my YouTube channel where I post content related to Android and Firebase, and few of the tutorials is on Kotlin too. So if you guys are interested, then you can join both of them. That should be helpful in longer run too.
Guys, do check out this Facebook group and the YouTube channel for the amazing content. And also, I'll be going through the Android Study Jam induction once again for the freshers who joined late after the induction happened. So, if you're interested, you can wait for some more time and we'll start with the induction once again. Hello, everyone. I'll be going through the protocols very quickly this time. Just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Kanishka Agarwal, and I'm from Bharatiya Vidyapeeth College of Engineering, New Delhi, and I'm the Android facilitator for the Android Study Jams. I'm also the lead there. Moving on, welcome everyone to Android Study Jams. What Android Study Jams are basically, these are the community organized study groups. These are basically created so that you can have hands on learning for Android app development. Then it's a basic series of sessions like the session that we had today, and we'll try to conduct multiple sessions. Also, you have to complete the tracks and everything. I'll go through that in this slide. So firstly, you need to complete this track that is mentioned on my screen, and you can go to this link or search this thing, Android Basics and Kotlin course. Then you need to attend the jam sessions, and we'll be providing the details prior to the session, the topics and everything. Then you need to work in teams or you can work individually to create an Android application. The Android application can be a basic application basically, and We'll be going through the details of the applications soon. So you need to create very basic apps, or if you're experienced, you can work on the like advanced apps as well. There's no restriction on that. Then this is how it would look like, your learning tracks and everything that I just mentioned. There are 6 units in total, and you need to complete 16 pathways, 16 quizzes, and 16 badges. Like once you complete the pathway, you'll have to attempt a quiz, and then you'll get a badge on your Google Developers profile, the URL that you just submitted in the Google form. Then, if you have a question regarding the Android study jams, you can put those in the chat box or the comments, and I'll be keeping this meeting on for like 5 minutes for your doubts. I'll share the details about the application and the form and the submission very soon. You can start making your app whenever you want, but you'll have to submit the app before 10th of January. And I'll try to conduct a session next week regarding the topics and the themes for the apps. You can also work on open innovation themes, like it's not a problem. And again, to submit the app, I'll be having a Google form link probably, and you'll have to create a GitHub repository. So I guess that clears your doubt. Any other questions if you guys have? So I guess there are no more questions, and I'll be closing off the session. So thank you very much for joining. I hope you guys learned something out of it, and thank you to our amazing speaker for such an interesting and insightful session. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.